Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke.
And today we're going to talk about what's happening to the birds, or is this really the canary in the coal mine? And we're joined by Dawn Hewett, editor of Birdwatchers Digest. And my reference to the canary in the coal mine, clearly, hopefully people know, right? The coal miners used to bring the canary down in, and if the canary died, it was an indication there was toxic gas. So Dawn, is the canary dying?
Oh, man, I try to be an optimist, but in this case, it's really hard to be optimistic. You know, a couple of months ago, there was a report in various scientific journals about how relative to 1970, there are an estimated 3 billion, with a B, fewer birds living in North America right now. And that was really kind of cold water in the face to realize that bird populations could be measured and had been being measured all these years, and that we've lost so many birds.
Is this a decline across all species, or is it like specific species have been dying off, or what's the deal?
Well, grassland species have been particularly hard hit. And, you know, actually there are some species and types of birds that have been increasing. Their populations have been increasing even since the 70s. But it has been more than offset by the number of birds, individual birds that have been on decline. Grassland species, primarily, I would say, because of habitat loss. Those are birds like dick thistles and bobolinks. I'm thinking of, maybe also upland sandpipers, but birds that they need grasslands, native grasslands like prairies, and not vast monocultures of agricultural land where pesticides kill the foods, the little grubs and insect larvae that they feed their babies, and herbicides that wipe out the quote weeds that they need for their seeds. So that to me seems to be the biggest explanation why we've seen such a decrease in bird numbers since the 1970s. You know, there's something else. We often think about when we were kids. You know, there were woods that are now subdivisions and neighborhoods and all that. We can all remember clearly examples of places that used to be natural areas and now they've been paved or otherwise developed. But we're thinking about that from our childhoods, which, you know, were maybe 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. But even that baseline we were starting from was so vastly different from the habitats and natural areas that were available to wildlife 50 years prior, or 50 years prior, or 50 years prior. We have never seen what the wildlife of North America looked like hundreds of years ago. We've heard stories about passenger pigeons, you know, 3 billion individual birds completely gone, the species wiped out. We can't even imagine how they darkened the skies and pooped on the landscape. But they're gone now. And there's no trace of them except for a few examples in museums. But we just don't know, can't imagine the abundance of wildlife before the Europeans arrived on this continent. We have a biased perspective, even when we think about how things used to be.
Those darn Europeans, they caused a lot of trouble for everybody, not just the birds and the insects. So
yeah, no kidding, right?
Yeah.
Maybe peoples, too, yeah.
Yeah, definitely people. So tell us a little bit about where you live now and what you do for a living.
Sure. I live in kind of an urban setting in Marietta, Ohio. This is the world headquarters for Birdwatchers Digest, which is North America's oldest popular magazine about wild birds, written for the people who enjoy them. I'm a birder. I've been a birder since 1979 when I took a college course in lab ornithology, but we could get extra credit for hanging out with the local bird club. So I got up early before 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, one morning for extra credit, just to go birding in Morgantown, West Virginia. And I loved it. I loved birding. I loved looking for species I hadn't seen before and listening for sounds that I had ignored. And it changed my life. It was a college course that really changed my life. So I've been a serious birder since 1979. I lived in Bloomington, Indiana for 31 years, and I was a birder there, too. That's really where I honed my skills as a birder. And I got to go birding with really wonderful birders. And then at age 55, 6 years ago,
you've told people your age.
Yeah. 6 years ago, pushing 7 years ago, I found my dream job here at Birdwatchers Digest as the managing editor. So now, I am so lucky, blessed. I get paid to think about birds and to encourage people to enjoy and respect and be concerned about bird habitat and conservation.
Well,
and
when we lived in England, I mean, bird watching was a big, big thing.
It's a religion there.
Yeah. Is it a big thing here in the U.S.? I don't hear that much about it.
Well, yeah, this number is not right, but there are something like 3 million birders in the United States. And if you look at all the people who feed the birds and are just aware of and enjoy the birds in their backyard, I mean, it's a big thing. But the really dedicated birders, like me, the people who go out specifically to find birds, to find new species, or just to enjoy migration, who's passing through right now and how that changes. There are hundreds of thousands of birders in North America, but this is a much bigger country than England is. So
don't tell them that, Dawn. So let me say something too. Is that probably the bigger figure, which I haven't looked at recently, but I know right around 2008 or 2009, I was looking up about birds and bluebirds and things, and I saw that people spent $3 billion, that's with a B, dollars the year before on stuff to be birders.
Yeah.
So that's really an industry. It's not just people saying, "Oh, aren't the birds cute?"
Right, exactly. But even people who just say, "Aren't the birds cute?" and I think I'll feed them, they spend a whole lot of money on bird seed and bird houses.
Yeah.
And bird seed's kind of expensive. So, and then there's optics. Serious birders have to have binoculars and often spotting scopes. And I personally have binoculars in my car, next to my kitchen window. I have them in my office window. And then I have my good binoculars that I take when I'm off birding.
Your dress-up binoculars.
That's right. No, they're really good binoculars. They're Zeiss Victory SF binoculars, and they are the best binoculars in the world, and I'm really, really, really lucky to have them.
Well, you're the editor. You should have them.
I should have them.
Yes, that's right. So what did you want to be when you were a little girl, and how has that translated into what you're doing now?
Oh, I never had a clear idea of what I wanted to be. I mean, even as a child, I didn't know, and in college, I didn't know, and I didn't have a clear vision of what I wanted for my future. It wasn't until I landed this job at age 55 that I was like, oh, man, this is it? This is, wow, oh, this is it. I didn't know, but as a kid, I loved hanging out in my grandfather's farm fields and going for walks in the woods and just playing outdoors. Although I wasn't really a nature geek, as some kids are. So that, too, didn't hit me until I was in college, when I really started caring about wildflowers and habitat and habitat diversity, biodiversity, all that. So, I loved being outdoors. And I loved canoeing. In high school, I'd gone on long canoe trips and hiking and backpacking and all that, but I really didn't connect with nature, I suppose, until I got hooked on birds.
Okay,
Bitten by the birding bug, they say.
You were saying that we've seen about 3 billion fewer. Well, we haven't seen them. There are 3 billion fewer birds. Yeah, which is massive. Largely due to habitat and environmental issues. So we're seeing the effects of this, but how do we deal with that? I mean, what are some of the alternatives? Because I've always heard, like, okay, you can feed the birds, but then they become dependent, and that's not necessarily a good thing either. So what can individuals do to help stem this problem?
I would say feeding the birds is not going to help the birds. It can even be harmful if you provide feeders but then don't clean them. Dirty bird feeders can really be a vector for disease for birds. But there are things we can do to help birds. And some of them include things like supporting small-scale and local farms rather than large industrial farms that are so heavily dependent upon chemical fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides.
But you mean by supporting, you mean like buying food from them, or in what way?
I support my local farmers market. I shop there just about every week and try to buy as much of my food as I can from small-scale farmers. They may not be certified organic, but often they are grown using organic methods, and that means they're bug-friendly, and bug-friendly is bird-friendly.
Woohoo! I love that. Yes, I agree.
And even in our own yards, when we're gardening, if we can not use pesticides and herbicides, there are companion plants that can be effective at deterring insects in our gardens. We need to value insects as pollinators and just as baby bird food, because that's what insect larvae is. It's baby bird food. And grubs in the yard and earthworms, we need to encourage those things by planting more native plants, which birds recognize. They've evolved to recognize native plants. And native plants are, adapted for native insects. It's this whole native ecosystem that is so valued. There's a recent study that said that I'm going to get these numbers wrong too. But
that's okay, Dawn, because we make up most of our statistics here. So so just make up whatever number you want.
Yeah, give me 5 minutes and I'll tell you the exact accurate number.
Well, 90% of all statistics are made up anyway. So
okay, that's good. But so I won't use the numbers here. But native plants are so much more productive at providing native insects that native birds recognize and eat. So if there's one change you want to make to help the birds, it's to rip out your pretty plants and replace them with native plants.
Well, native plants can be very beautiful, especially if you do companion planting and absolutely fantastic plants. It's just that we don't have education around those.
Exactly. And we seem to think that exotic is somehow classier or special. But it seems like we're making the unfamiliar plants common, and the plants that have been here for thousands of years are on the retreat,
Yeah, I think
we used to have thousands and thousands of acres of prairie, and now prairie is just in little tiny pockets here and there. And so what happens to the prairie birds and other species that were dependent on prairies? They're in retreat.
Okay, well, with that in mind, I want to remind everybody that you are listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, reminding you it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
And thank God.
Thank God. And apparently it's the end of the world for the birds because so what you're saying, and it sounds like the disappearing of the birds is a byproduct of an unhealthy and environmentally unhealthy lifestyle that we have adopted. And if we adopt a more environmentally healthy lifestyle, then the birds hopefully will respond in kind. Is that?
Well, wait, I want to say something about that because when we say it's the end of the world as we know it, and thank God, what we really want to talk about is things are happening and we're not happy and sometimes very sad. We're very sad about it. But what can we do to put these something new in its place? That's where we're going with all of this. Right.
Well, the end of the world as we know it is that world that has resulted in the death of 3 billion birds.
Yeah.
So that's coming to an end. So you were talking about supporting smaller agricultural activities. Some of the things I know that kill birds a lot are vehicles, tall buildings, even cell towers, things like that. Are there things we could be doing that would minimize some of that damage?
Yeah. two things come to mind right away, and one of them is that in New York, the state of New York, for all municipal or state-funded buildings, they need to have bird-friendly glass installed. This is a trend that is increasing. There are ways that glass can be built that birds realize that it is an impervious surface. You know, transparent windows are completely foreign to birds. They just don't get the whole concept of, what do you mean I can see through it, but I can't fly through it? And that's why that's why glass and tall skyscrapers are so deadly to birds. And especially when the lights are on at night. If skyscrapers would turn out their lights at night, birds wouldn't be attracted to them. But as it is, they see lights at night and try to fly right through their windows. It can be a gruesome sight. There are organizations called Lights Out Chicago, Lights Out Indianapolis, Lights Out Columbus. And what these groups do is, first thing in the morning during migration, they walk the streets and pick up carcasses, sometimes dozens or hundreds a day of dead birds that have flown into buildings. That's
so sad.
Yeah, so just turn out the lights on tall buildings at night, or even your home, especially spring and fall during migration. Bird-friendly buildings or bird-safe buildings is one thing. But another thing is just keeping cats indoors. I have 6 cats, including 4 kittens I got recently, and they're all indoors. I plan to build a catio for them next spring so that they can crawl out a window and have a safe space. They won't get hit by cars, and I don't need to worry about mean people doing bad things to my cat. But even as it is, right now, my cats are quite happy and safe and healthy inside. They don't get fleas. They don't get ear mites. But cats are estimated to kill millions of birds, wild birds, and other things, little mice and other native wildlife every year. So domestic cats are not native to North America. It is an exotic, invasive species. And here where I live in Marietta, there are stray cats all over the place. And I've seen countless cats with birds in their mouths. But it's not just stray or feral cats that are causing a problem to birds. It's domestic cats that are well-loved and well-fed. Cats just by nature, by their instincts, are hunters.
Yep.
And they will catch and kill wildlife.
Yep, they can't help themselves.
They can't help themselves. No, they're not being bad. They're just being cats.
Well, let me ask you a question. I wondered if you've heard of something called silvopasture.
I have not.
So this is a concept when you're talking about things that we could do. So people who do have wide open spaces or even an acre of land or a couple of acres could create a more natural environment that actually changes everything for the birds and also for insects, beneficial insects. So silvopasture is, I can't quote the exact definition, but it is about taking forest land and creating like meadows that could be grazed by animals interspersed in the forest. And they've been doing this in Britain for a while. There are several large projects there, and it has brought in species of birds that they haven't seen in 100 years have come back to the land. It's so invigorating to read about what's happening there. And new plants.
That sounds very cool.
Old plants have appeared that were not there before, but were there 100 years ago.
That's wonderful.
Yes, and I was thinking that could be really something that could be downsized for lesser lands, people who don't have 100 acres or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I even think of my own backyard, which is just an urban, probably quarter acre, if even that, but it's a long, deep yard. And I think of it as being potentially habitat. It still has grass in it. And monocultural grass has very little value to birds in general, especially if it's sprayed with herbicides or pesticides. But I should be planting oak trees and maple trees and, serviceberry and other native plant species. Once upon a time, the place where I lived was a forest. Actually, it was right across the street from ancient Indian burial mounds. But there's no reason why we can't convert all of our lawns into wildlife habitat again. If we just change our aesthetic for what is a beautiful yard from a vast carpet of green grass. If we are willing to share the land we call our own with species that were there way before my ancestors got there, then I think we would have a very different aesthetic for how to make our lawns, our yards, more accommodating to wildlife, including insects.
Okay, well, so far we've come up with shop at your local farmer's market, get rid of your lawn, get rid of all of your cats. That's one I prefer.
Don't get rid of them.
No. I'm interpreting this as I choose to interpret it. So I'm going to use this as part of my lobbying campaign to get rid of some of the cats.
It won't work, Dawn. Don't worry.
But I was going to ask you, one of the things that I have heard, because I do a lot of studying of the technologies, and wind turbines, of course, always get the silly blame of killing off all of the birds. But I was actually reading something about the flashing lights on these towers, on cell towers, on wind turbines that are there to protect small aircraft, actually attract birds, and the birds often circle them and then fall to the ground primarily due to exhaustion or whatever, and then are killed by predators as opposed to hitting these towers. So is that something that you're saying that's a true thing?
It is absolutely a true thing. I've Googled it. I've looked at governmental reports on some of these things. Yeah, and sometimes there are like 1,000 dead birds of one species beneath a cell phone tower. Wow. And often the lights are to blame. I mean, I talked about birds just don't understand the concept of glass. They also don't understand the concept of artificial lights at night. Birds evolved with dark skies and dark landscapes at night. And they navigated by the stars. Who knows what all these satellites in the sky are doing regarding bird migration? I don't know that. But, yeah, it's lights on towers that can cause a serious problem, a disorientation among migrating birds. And, even on 9/11, where at the memorial in New York City, there are bird watchers looking at the night light display, and when they count 1,000 birds circling the buildings confused, they have the power to turn off the lights for 20 minutes and let the birds fly on. This happens every year. It's a thing. And then after 20 minutes, the lights come on, and then eventually the birds start circling and getting disoriented again, because September 11th is really a time of high bird migration. So, yeah, lights on towers are a serious problem.
Yeah, I'd heard some of the studies were showing going with solid lights, which was less disorienting, going with blue lights rather than red lights. So it seems like it's a problem we can solve if we just decide to solve it.
Well, possibly. But I have to disagree with you, Jay, because wind turbines really have been known to chop up birds. They have.
Oh, now you're on dangerous. I was with you up with the cats. Now I'm a little bit concerned with the wind turbines.
Well, but placement is a critical factor. So I am a proponent of wind. I love wind. I would love to have a little vertical turbine on my roof. But placement of wind turbines along known migration paths is just a death sentence for birds. That it really is. But there are bird-safe wind technologies. I'm all in favor of bird-safe wind power. That's all I can say. There was a proposal to...
Thank you, Dawn. That was very good. That was very good.
Yeah.
No, I think we've got to share the space. I mean, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. There are places where birds don't migrate. Let's locate the towers there.
That's right. That's right. You convinced him, Dawn.
I hope so.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. If it's a bargaining thing, let's bargain some cats away and then we'll put the wind turbines where you want them.
I love cats.
Yes. So how can we use the power that we have as people who care about birds or birders and all that money that they use, that they spend, how can we get them to do a better job at being more sustainable in their practices?
One thing, this is such a little thing, but every year I buy a duck stamp. Duck stamps are a federal program intended really, I think, for hunters. I think you're required to have a duck stamp to hunt on a national wildlife refuge. But I buy one, it's $25 every year, and it gets me into national wildlife refuges free, although many national wildlife refuges are free anyhow. But all that money goes to buying wildland habitat. So it adds lands to national wildlife refuges. And it provides, I spend $25 and I'm contributing to an increase in wildlife habitat in North America. So buying a duck stamp is a small, easy thing. I also support organizations like Land Trust, Sycamore Land Trust in Indiana, and the Friends of Lower Muskingum River here where I live, and the Nature Conservancy, which buys land or maintains conservation easements and ensures that this will be preserved as wildlife habitat in perpetuity. Well, I don't know how. I mean, there are plenty of birders who are just recreational birders and are not seeing a bigger picture of the impacts of their hobby on the environment. Or, for instance, I fly a lot to see birds. I'm headed to Oregon later this week for birding. I think it's going to be really good. But when I get back, I will pay a carbon fee, a self-imposed carbon fee. There are some websites that come with high recommendations and good scores for efficient use of money, so that the carbon I have contributed in my flights is mitigated by planting trees or building wind turbines or solar panels somewhere.
Well, Dawn, how can people contact Birdwatchers Digest?
Well, the easiest way is just to go to our website, birdwatchersdigest.com.
And can they join or contribute or do something?
Yeah, it's not really join. We are a private for-profit company. We're not like the Nature Conservancy or Audubon or Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So it's not anything you join. It's something you subscribe to. Although we're so personable, and we're a small local business,
That's great.
There's just 13 people on our staff.
Okay.
But if you go to our website, you'll get answers to all sorts of questions about birds. You'll get tons of content. We have, thousands of web pages all about wild birds.
Okay, well, Dawn, we're going to have to cut it off here, but we want to thank you for joining us. You've been listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke and Dawn Hewett, editor of Birdwatchers Digest. We also want to thank our Emmy Award-winning producer, Adam Rich. Thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother told you while watching birds, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is...
play nice with others, clean up your own mess, and turn your lights off at night.
Okay, till next time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thank
Mother
you.
Earth will sing, and her children will be healed. See the morning glory blossom in the night. Know the stars are dancing in the twilight. Soon we'll be together, all will be revealed. Mother Earth will sing, and her children will be healed.
You can find more information on living sustainably in our unsustainable world at bluerockstation.com.